Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Greetings to everybody here today joining the Innovation Speaker Series. My name is Ashley Anthony. I'm happy to help host, but the Atlantic Canada Climate Network is very proud to co present this event with the Canadian Environmental Network. We've come together for this project to showcase cutting edge emergent technologies and their potential to advance climate solutions and create new opportunities. So, the Innovation Speaker Series aims at fostering collaboration and knowledge exchange amongst diverse actors passionate about addressing climate change. But we're also excited to present the second season here of the Innovation Speaker Series. You can join us every month for a thought provoking presentation that will critique dominant ways of knowing, being, and doing, and allow us to create informed conversations that will lead to a more equitable and sustainable tomorrow. But before I begin, I would love to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the relationship that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across Canada have with the land that all Canadians live on and enjoy. We would like to recognize that the ACCN operates on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqiyik, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and Abenaki nations, or the Wabanaki Confederacy, as well as Innu and Inuit peoples. This territory is covered by treaties of peace and friendship, which these nations first signed with the British Crown in 1726. But these treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So it's in this humble spirit of peace and friendship that I greet you all today. But this also reminds us that each of the 634 First Nations communities, 53 Inuit communities, and 8 Métis settlements all have a historically, culturally, spiritually, and environmentally unique connection that is sustainable to their land that their people and ancestors have inhabited since time immemorial. So it's at this moment that we encourage all Canadians and visitors to this land to learn deeply about and regularly acknowledge the historic and current relationship that exists between the unceded land on for which we live and work and enjoy and flourish, and the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We also encourage all Canadians to consider how they can personally contribute to Canada's reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Andrew Murray. Andrew is the visionary entrepreneur and sustainability advocate leading the charge at Aslan Renewables. With a strong background in neuroscience, biophysics, and technology, Andrew has successfully founded and grown multiple companies, including Spotful, which was acquired by Lune Rouge Partners. Driven by a passion for renewable energy, Andrew has established Aslan Renewables to revitalize, and this is the coolest part, abandoned hydro sites to promote sustainability energy solutions. So, through his innovative approach and collaborative efforts with local communities and First Nations, Andrew is helping to unlock the untapped potential of these forgotten energy sources. So, it is my delightful honor to introduce and hand you over to Andrew Murray. Thank you for being here today with us, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Ashley. And thank you everyone for tuning in. So look, I guess I'll start by sharing my screen. Is that all right?
Cool. Yep. Does it work for you?
It's going to, yeah, give me one sec here. Okay. Let me move things around a bit. All right, thanks everyone for joining. And it's my absolute pleasure to take you through this deck that we've prepared and tell you a little bit about our story at Aslan. This project and this company really started as a very eye-opening history lesson. So I thought it was only appropriate that we start in the same way today. So look, Aslan really has the operational belief that the cities and the towns that really defined our country were really defined by the mills that surrounded them. So we're talking grist mills and timber mills. This is really what laid the groundwork for the Canada that we know today. Starting back in the early 17th century with Port-la-Joie in 1607, following with Quebec in 1647, and later we saw Kingston, major sites of the mills that define this part of the country. Later on, as these locations grew, as more settlers kind of moved in this direction, moved west across what we know as Canada now, we saw more and more of these sites get established throughout the nation. These kind of represent clusters of many, many different mills, grist, timber, even textile mills. And then as industrialization kind of swept through in the 1900s, something really interesting happened where a lot of these traditional mills started getting converted to hydropower stations. And this is, in fact, the first time that renewable energy flowed through our towns and cities, a massive, massive event in our history. And so, interestingly, shortly after that, we saw the introduction of something else, which you could probably guess would be distribution. So these newly established hydro sites started obviously transmitting power into the smaller towns, and the larger hydro stations that were established in the country became prominent and really took the place of the smaller hydro mills that had maybe been converted, maybe not. So we see a lot of these locations going through kind of the 1910s, 1920s, start to drop off. We see less and less of them showing up until finally, when we get into, about 1925, 1930, you've really just got your most prominent major kind of hydro stations, many of which are still here today. Now, at this time, we were starting to really like things that were big. And this continued on into the 50s. We liked things that were bigger. We liked things that were shinier. And this was the movement in Canada that ushered in the era of the mega dam. This is a picture, I think, taken in 1918, 1920. And this is Adam Beck. This is a station that's still operational today. In fact, a lot of us are getting our power from there right now. And, this movement had a ton of benefits, okay? It was able to focus resources, focus innovation. We as a people got really good at hydro, especially big hydro. But this was the moment, folks, where the small dam, the small hydro site disappeared, okay? And we asked this question a few years ago, and we've learned so much about this. What really happened to those sites after this mass decommissioning, after all of that infrastructure was pulled out of the water, some of it just left on the bank, as you can see. What happened to those sites? And the answer is you probably see them all the time. The answer is they're still there. And in fact, they look a lot like this. And so I'm sure that this is recognizable to a lot of you because it represents thousands of sites across this country that where the elevation of those original mills is actually maintained. So, we couldn't just take the infrastructure out, right? Because our ancestors had changed the landscape. They changed the topography. And the topography of rivers matters because, you have flood risk. And so what we end up with here today is numerous sites all across the country. We're clocking tens of thousands of these right now that are pretty interestingly similar, but more importantly, for this point of the conversation, maintained on public dollar. This is public infrastructure. So it's up to date, it's kept in place, and it's a relatively great condition. And now I wanted to show you something outside of the screen if my power will let me. You may be wondering kind of what this looked like in the US, and I want to show you something here, just a really short clip of this video that addresses this in an interesting way.
The era of big dam construction in the United States is over. However, there's still huge potential for growth in the industry using the existing infrastructure. We have 90,000 dams in this country, most of which were built for flood control, for irrigation, for water storage, for recreation. Only 3% of those dams are actually used for generating power.
Which is a crazy figure, right? And so we find out pretty quickly, looking at that the US went through a really similar program to Canada, decommissioning these sites across the board. Let me get you back up to speed here. So far in our journey, we have documented 54,000 dormant dams across Canada. Now, these are it's pretty interesting to track these down, though we don't have as much data on them as the US does because their data comes from the Army Corps of Engineers for the most part. We're able to track these through historical and public record. So we can tell kind of the maintenance profile, we can tell, of course, the location, and we can tell their backstory. On the US side, there's another 84,000 dams. So almost 140,000 locations across North America currently sitting kind of untapped and certainly unactivated. Our analysis plus a lot of survey data comes up with an incredible figure, which is there's over 1.6 million metric tons of water flowing over these sites every single second. So it's a huge, huge opportunity for a company like Aslan to come in and reimagine activating those spots, right? Now, Aslan started during COVID. This was 2019, 2020. And in an effort to kind of get out and stay mobile, we were in PEI and we had a wonderful time just kind of walking the trails. As we were just staying mobile to the best of anybody's ability, we started coming across these sites. And these are pictures that we took kind of in the wild. And this is when the question of kind of productization or reintroduction of modern tech started to brew. Now, what I noticed about these sites beyond kind of just their natural beauty was that they're pretty well all identical. So each one of them, of course, you can see the maintenance is really tight here, but you've also got about 2.2 to 2.5 meters of elevation across the board. So you've got a standard head pressure that we're able to work with, and you have a flow rate that you see again and again and again in our samples of about a cubic meter per second. So this is kind of when the question hits, if we were able to introduce modern tech or a modern configuration to these sites, one or two of them, pilots, that could come in and create equitable power and do it in a way that was ecologically neutral. It stands to reason that we would be able to replicate that maybe thousands of times across our country and maybe further. Because the truth is, hydro needs to continue to scale, but it can't do it in the way that it's doing right now. The way that hydro's been built kind of looks like this. It's big, it's heavy, they're typically made one at a time, and they're typically made for a very specific customer, right? What you need in order to scale a category like this is something lighter, more agile, something that's more cost effective, and ultimately something that can kind of be suited to the needs of, much more a wider range of circumstances, right? So this is what we did. We set out to look at each one, a large sample of these locations, and develop a product vision that could be introduced to activate all of them. What if we could build one system that would activate all of that, all of those dormant dams across both of these territories? Something simple, something light, something that you could put in, take out, you could test, you could iterate on, we could tinker with in the same way that we've done with solar and wind, right? And so that's kind of where we started. We started with these types of turbines. We still use some of these in the field, but we started building something that was extremely agile for a space that's been extremely heavy over the years. And now I guess we'll talk through kind of the rollout of hydro productization. So in development, we were able to remove the need for excavation of these sites. No concrete, no breaking ground. We did that by, of course, working with existing infrastructure. We were able to eliminate the need for drain down. We don't have to drain the ponds because we're clipping onto existing points of elevation. We even, of course, removed the need for customizing the length of spillways. We did this by inserting modular arcs into the top of the water column so that we could introduce a single product 2 times to fit a small system or 25 times to fit a larger system. But no water system that we've surveyed anyway gets left behind. Even beyond this, a major point of innovation and like a huge point of collaboration between our Canadian utilities and ourselves. We were able to design our interconnection points using technology developed by solar to do simple inversions so we don't have to build the mega distribution centers that hydro has relied on in the past. This technology, as we activate site to site, can tie into the grid, feed in its energy wherever it happens to be, right? We can work with the existing environment and we don't have to disrupt further. So let's talk about the impact of productization in this space. Again, like productization in hydro is an extremely sort of disruptive, kind of a groundbreaking movement. We've been exploring it and testing it now for 5 years. And we have some incredible outcomes. So here's what happens. First of all, you obviously lower the financial risk. This is a ridiculous understatement. The hydro installations that we know as Canadians throughout the country, I mean, these are all, for the most part, multi-billion-dollar installs. Extremely heavy on permitting, extremely heavy on technical requirements, etc. These sites are able to come in for far under $100,000 a piece. We take control of environmental impact. Again, huge. Because we're installing a single product in every site, there's no customization. It's not a one-off. We're doing the same thing site to site to site with the same procedure. It means that our environmental impact profile, meaning the way that we change the local ecology, is almost neutral. Right. And we're able to document that to the point where our regulatory bodies and our First Nations partners who kind of led this design movement are able to recognize that, you know, we're not going through another massive establishment of a hydro site. We're just implementing the same system again, as if you were installing solar panels on another roof. And so the permitting has changed here in a way that allows the company to expand like nothing has ever happened before in hydro. Simple installation and management. This sounds obvious and maybe just not even that important to mention. But what this really means, folks, is when you have a hydro system that's all of a sudden simple to put on the grid and simple to manage, your operation and your maintenance is almost neutral. Think of it, again, same as a panel or a wind turbine. It means that other folks can operate your system. You can mass produce these things, and so it becomes a hydro station in a box that you can ship to underserved communities. You can ship to, you know, a school construction project in Sri Lanka, and you know, have folks, communities on the ground manage their power needs themselves. Lastly, is a massive increase in efficiency. Now, what I mean by efficiency is dollars in, volts out. So across all of renewable energy, we have a metric called LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, which basically shows you, you know, the cost of generation in your different categories. So I'm going to show you kind of how this fits into the existing landscape and where that landscape kind of found us. LCOE is here. First off, let's start off with our legacy hydro or traditional hydro. Here it is at 13 cents. Now, this is actually a great cost of energy. It really is. When you're building a large station, this would be your most modern stuff. Your older stations, it would be quite a bit higher. But today, if you're going to build a large hydro install, it kind of looks like this. Now, distractingly, we've got our rock stars over here, solar and wind. These guys have been developing above the ground and have had so much innovation and iteration over the past 50 years that their costs have come way, way down, right? There are teams tinkering with these things, improving them. And as a result, your cost benefit is hugely affected. And even the most modern hydro installs that you see on the left can't really catch up here. But what happens when you productize that approach? What happens when you start to think modular, you start to think mass, you start to think kind of third-party installs, shipping, like empowering communities? We catch up. And so today, Aslan's V1 on the market, the one that we are installing in partnership with governments, First Nations groups, and utilities across Canada, is producing energy at a cost on par with solar. That's absolutely unheard of in this category. And it kind of really opens the door for a massive amount of community engagement for us, but also a huge potential impact for our grid, right? Allowing hydro to catch up. Impact. This is the impact font. Okay, here we go. First of all, the first thing that we see, I'm just going to move you guys because you're all on my screen. I'm going to move you over here. Baseload supply. The first thing that happens when you unlock like about 50 terawatts of potential energy onto the grid is it affects your baseload supply. Now, this is really important because this is what forged our relationships with utilities, governments as well. But this is where the utilities really, really brought us in as partners, adopted the technology, because our grids are old school, folks. They can't keep up with the spikes of sunny days and windy days forever. And so what you need is a base load that underwrites the development of those technologies. Because as you can see, I mean, solar and wind, we all know this, they're intermittent technologies. And with the absence of scalable storage, you end up with problems like demand not intersecting with supply. And so the underwriter is your baseload. Aslan's systems coming in incrementally, one at a time, with tiny, tiny steps building up to a massive supply, increases that baseload to give us one, incredible energy security. Like hydro is the kind of category keeping this thing going. It's allowing for us to have long-term energy security, and it's allowing for the innovation to happen on the higher end of this curve. Those spikes can continue to develop. We can mess around with those spikes more. We can put more in the system if you have hydro continue to scale and make sure that you've got it backed up, if that makes sense. Because of course, I mean, as compared to these two, hydro is running 24 hours a day, 365, and it's incredibly reliable, even during the winter. And I can take questions on that later. But what we've seen is just wonderful, wonderful consistency. Now, second major impact that we've seen, and something that work that we're just really thrilled, excited to be doing, is introducing this technology to underserved communities. And what I mean by that is communities that are currently running on diesel, off-grid communities, or even folks anywhere in the world where power supply is not a given. So let's just look at what the, am I dying here? I'm missing an image, but that's okay. What this means tangibly on the ground for these communities is a localized source of clean energy. It means community managed power. So true sort of energy independence. And that can mean a lot of things. In practice, if you are a community that's living off grid and you're not able to manage your own power supply, your own energy resources, switching that around and empowering that community to grow, to build in ways that they could not before has incredible implications. And of course, your technical job creation. Remember, this is something that's designed to be operated by a third party. We're not sending teams out in the field everywhere to kind of pulse check on these things. They're truly designed to empower the users themselves. But at a commercial scale, this is not residential scale, it's commercial. And so we're not talking about an individual, we're talking about a community, a hospital, a school. I want to give you a case study as my last kind of, how are we doing for time, Ashley? Yeah, we're okay. Am I dying here? Okay. This is Wati. one of many, many communities way up north. Wati is about 200 kilometers north of Yellowknife. They have power. They have no energy reserves, and so they don't lack for energy, but energy is still a concern when it comes to, again, building, expanding, and growing, right? Now, interestingly for us, when we look at this case, and we go again like into historic record, and we kind of do a little bit of research on here. You can see down at the bottom right, there's an old place called Fort Resolution. Fort Resolution was home to one of the largest timber mills in the Northwest Territories. And in fact, they branched off. You have two more that are even farther north. These are all retired locations, but they were extremely important, successful sites that led to the establishment of some of these spots, right? So if we do the numbers on this activation, using all the information that I've given you so far and some of the hard data on what an Aslan activation puts into the economy, this looks like this. So the population of Wati right now is about 500 people, and their usage is about 1250 megawatt hours per year. That's an average over the whole year. That's not their output, but this is what they would use. Now, in order to establish entire kind of energy security, give them reserves, give them baseload under their own management, the number of units that would come off our floor to solve this problem is 3. And so you go from the reality right now where, there are diesel trucks on the road servicing this location. There are folks that when they put in proposals, when they brainstorm about where this can go as a community, power is a concern, it is a constraint. The number of units out of our shop to truly solve that and turn over the keys is 3 units. Okay, so in conclusion, folks, what we're talking about here is consistent, secure power to our grid to underwrite the spikes of all intermittent technologies, those that we have now and those to come. We're talking about energy sovereignty for our most historically underserved communities. We're talking about scalable production of a product ready for scalable export. And lastly, we're talking about a solid, dependable, clean power source for international communities and projects in need of a clean energy future. And that's what I've got for you today.
Wow, I have to consider me impressed that you are an incredible presenter, Andrew. Very grateful for your ability to lead us through definitely a compelling conversation. I would love to lead the first question, but please, anybody that's on the call, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. We would love to answer anything that's piquing your interest. my first question is, this sounds absolutely incredible. What are the hurdles, or what are maybe some of the feedbacks that you have got that have slowed the acceleration of the implementation?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ashley. So first of all, it's been in R&D for about 4 years. At the same time, there was a huge amount of policy innovation that had to happen province to province in order to bring this to reality. I'm proud to say that we've accomplished that. We've gotten over those hurdles, but it's not a small thing. And what I mean is, you've got to work tri-party with utilities, provincial governments, and federal regulators to make sure that this fits. And in fact, there is no distributed PPA or distributed kind of terms out of the gate available for hydro in this country. Definitely not in Atlantic Canada, where we kind of started this mission, right? So we started there as a business case, working with government to say, look, like, I'm going to put 1,000 power stations in. How are you going to manage that? How are we going to do this? Because it's going to work. And we had run a couple of pilots to demonstrate that it was real. And so that was a major one. Second is, really just going kind of territory to territory, getting utilities on board and getting them through. One hurdle that we haven't seen that we expected to was manufacturing. I'm sure a lot of people in this conversation would know really well, especially in the renewable space. It's hard to build things in Canada right now, right? It has been for a few years. We don't see that issue here. Our supply chain is largely domestic. Our turbines are technology agnostic. They come in from just about anywhere, including even university labs and things like that. Where we are doing core components is in steel, and we can do that province to province. So that's been something that's really, really encouraged the company's development.
Wow, that very hopeful. A narrative that's kind of, I'm just going to follow up and then pass it to hopefully somebody else that has a great question. But a narrative specifically here in New Brunswick, I do live in St. John, and so we have Birch Hill Wind Farm. And there
Mhm.
has been a lot of talk from NB Power, or, maybe the people that live behind the veil, not quite sure, about the the interesting effect that energy sovereignty within communities has on monopolized energy providers. Have you
Mhm.
seen anything that supports this type of narrative? Has there been any maybe not so great responses from larger monopolized energy providers that have had maybe a strategy already implemented and this did not fall under it?
Mm. It's tricky. Um, To be honest, no. I expected to. I expected to. I expected that it would be a complex conversation, especially when we talk about the potential that this can have for communities directly. But what I've seen is some kind of the opposite. I found that at the utility level, you know, the way that this solves an issue for baseload, it's also solving an issue of underserved communities. This is a scramble, right? This is something that utilities have the responsibility to cover. And so, if you can come in with something light, something cost effective, like something kind of as easy to understand as this, and say, look, we can patch that. Um, we've seen a lot of positive feedback. Now, the other part of this is our agreements and our structures are basically as flexible as this tech set, right? In that, if a partnership is what's important for the community itself, or the utility, or the province, or just the landscape, then it's something that we can do. And Aslan, in fact, like, oh, the vast, vast majority, like 99% of our deployments, we participate in as a majority partner. So we're the ones who own and operate the assets in the field, of course, with the exception of international export, right? But we're the ones there operating. It's just about making sure that these communities, or even these grids have that reliant base load that they need, you know?
Thank you for that. I have another question from the audience. Why do you think that hydroelectricity in the sector has seen less investment and research compared to solar or wind?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I think for a long time, people just thought it was a given. It's very, very recently that we've seen things like very complex environmental permitting preventing scale, or changing water levels. Hydro has always been kind of the grandfather of renewables. It's been in the background, sitting there saying, I got you. The reality here is, it's no longer scaling. And in order to meet electrification demand, it needs to. But the other real reason is environmental permitting is impossible, period, full stop. You cannot build a new hydro station in North America. As our friend from the National Hydropower Association said in that small clip, I hope you folks could hear it, by the way. The age of the mega dam is over. And that's not because it doesn't work well. It's because you can't get the permits to terraform a river. That is done, right? We've learned those lessons, in many cases the hard way. And those lessons continue to be learned in other places in the world. Like China is still developing mega dams, and there are still mega consequences. But we're lucky that our policymakers and our kind of renewable innovators have moved off of that. But it still bears the question of how do you continue to scale that baseload?
Very, very true. And I think, from Site C all the way to Muskrat Falls, we've also seen huge inflation on these projects and huge
Yeah.
costs to First Nations and neighboring communities. So it makes sense that the era of the mega dam is coming to an end. Is it safe to assume that the Peace River Dam project is grandfathered in? I'm assuming, Andrew, that you're also talking about Site C. There's technically three dams on the Peace River that affect, in fact, affect the Athabasca Delta and into the Northwest Territories. Are you referring to Site C, Andrew?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Over
Sorry,
to the
Andrew.
other Andrew. He did say that Site C. Do you think that Site C is one of these projects that are grandfathered in? There's never going to be another one like that?
That's for me, yes.
Mm-hmm. The clash
I
of the Andrews.
sorry, Andrew. Um, it's a pleasure to chat. I do think so. I mean, like, you know, the sea where I'm sitting is not one like I don't have a vast knowledge of kind of classical hydro projects. We've built up a lot of understanding through research and stuff, but I'm not really sitting at that table to tell you too much about it. It really just comes from the notions that we get. I mean, like to the question that was posed in the chat before, we're just not seeing that much investment come in. We're also not seeing a lot of accessibility, which is an interesting thing. You know, everybody understands up and down solar and wind, and it's kind of resident, like direct to consumer applications, all of this stuff. We don't see that same investment or that same growth path in hydro. And that's something that we really, really want to conquer here. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that, I mean, as you can tell, I believe that this is the right way forward for hydro as a category. And I think like large scale projects will likely still show up in one way or another. Um, but the permitting realities are clear and the consequences are clear. And it's not that it's impossible, folks. It's just getting a lot harder. If we want to think about a scalable hydro future, this one is a lot easier.
I have another question here. Do you have any concerns about the changes in water flows driven by climate change or any other disruptions?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, again, like productization has an answer for that. Like this type of approach, working with light, agile product, this takes one day to install, right? And in fact, it takes one day to move, which is a really interesting concept in this category. You know, if you have a changing water flow that's too strong or too nascent, you can reposition these, reconfigure them. You can take a turbine out and replace it with something more powerful in an afternoon. So that agility, I think, is something that's really, really needed in this space. And where that goes, actually, I'm not 100% sure. You know, it's for us, I think, as renewable innovators, it's to be sitting, approaching it from a place where, you know, we can pull out a blackboard and answer the question and not saying, damn, we just poured $4 billion of concrete. You know what I mean? Like, what do we do? And so I think that I'm not sure what is going to kind of transpire there, but I think that we're really prepared for the future.
I like that you touched on the modular ability of it. So I know that this is your first version, and you said in your last comment that you could easily replace them in an afternoon. I assume that that means that any upgraded technology that you're going to be coming out with that, or even anything that needs to repair, very easy to plug in and play and readjust kind of type deal. So as you were saying, these are community led projects and not necessarily supported by teams of experts.
That's right.
Yeah, and how do you see the future of this modular ability growing?
Well, we have great examples in the field for that answer, and it's solar. So what I mean by that is, you know, our core engineering team are extremely focused on documentation, extremely focused on coordination, things like that. But the installs don't happen through us. They happen through third-party teams, province to province in the field. Those are civil engineering teams on the ground, right? In the same way that, you know, the manufacturer of the solar panel doesn't install it on your house, we can use the same supply chain in order to put these into the field. So that's really how we see it going. We intend to remain a tight core team and rely on and empower a bunch of external contracting partners who can put this into their known environments, right? We want to work with the best people in Northern Ontario who know that space and know that infrastructure to put that infrastructure in place. We don't want to come in with Aslan on the side of a truck and say we're setting up shop, right?
Ooh, I love when you talk about how community experts should be leading community projects. That sounds like
With
it's
you.
right up our alley here. Frank has a comment. He's first says, "Great presentation, Andrew."
Thank you.
And then he wants to know, are your electrical grid connections typically microgrid within local communities or distribution level interconnection?
So both. It's designed for microgrid. It's designed for microgrid in every case. We do have a few examples. So I said, I mean, these are expandable to different size water systems. We do have some that are capacity rated for a level that would go that would really need a distribution system. But luckily enough, those sites are typically very close to distribution systems already because of their size or historical capacity. So I mean, I guess the most important answer here is this is designed to be able to be transmitted onto the grid really wherever these sites show up. Existing transmission points are important here, but in the same way that you can put your excess solar back onto distribution, we can do that from any touch point. Very important.
That is very important. Nobody wants to spend an extra couple $1 million having to run their own power
Right.
lines because we have
Right.
seen that out here before as well. Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, Brienne, just as I said that, does the community pay for the upfront cost of the installation? And if so, do you have estimates for how long it takes for the community to recoup the cost, like the cost related to relative to other electricity sources, for example, like diesel?
Yeah, great. Yeah, the recoup question is an awesome one. But I mean, to curtail that, Aslan finances everything, 100 cents on the dollar. So when we come into a community, the company finances the install, and then we set up a power purchase agreement with the local utility to push that electricity back to the grid. Those partnerships, it's fun to kind of innovate at that level. We do get to play around a bit and include other partners. For example, we put in a community give back program this year that makes sure that anyone close to the install is seeing revenue back. And so that plays ball with a lot of watershed organizations and folks like this, where we're able to do things like trail maintenance.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Do you foresee future units being made that would allow property owners with creeks or brooks running through them utilize this as like they do with solar and wind, having a privatized generation system?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And power purchase agreements are changing. I mean, we see new programs coming in all the time, incentivizing these types of products. Um, what we typically see on an average Aslan site is a return to profitability within 2.6 to 3 years. So that's based on your average flow rates that we see in Atlantic Canada. So I mean, the window there is really, really phenomenal for the community. They're really able to break out within that time. And then, yeah, so we're doing that with in the case of export, and we're doing that in the case of some First Nation communities in Canada.
Yeah, and you touched a little bit on your work with the Concho government up in the Northwest Territories. Can you
Yeah.
speak a little further about your relationships with First Nation and how this could help with, relationships and sovereignty and decolonization?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is our very first meetings on this project were with First Nation. With the yeah, it was incredible. That I think is where the encouragement came from to carry it as far as it's gone. Because these groups ended up being our environmental advisory as a first step and kind of helping us to choose the first locations where they thought that it would be least ecologically damaging to do any kind of pilot work, and also would have the most kind of equitable output. We've kind of expanded that relationship from there to package up proposals or case studies with groups based on their needs, based on based on their real requirements. And so when we talk about energy sovereignty with them, it's a learning process from our side, 100%. We sit at the table and try to understand. That's why I mentioned this when we were kind of looking at the slide of underserved communities. Energy sovereignty means different things to different groups, different geographies. It's a wide range. And so I would say we're at the very beginning of that journey. We do have some phenomenal partners, but we're really kind of just laying this out to say, look, here's what we have. Tell us about your situation, what your drivers are, what's important to you. And we will tell you exactly how this can kind of fit into, um, to that set of requirements. So we're not exactly sure where it will go. Right now, I mean, we're experimenting, like I said, just with deploying these close to reserve communities so that they can distribute the energy internally first, and then any excess they put back onto the grid as a revenue source. But these are pilot programs, and they're absolutely one-offs. We're kind of going site to site, group to group to see what they need.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask? Feel free to unmute yourself and open up.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I always have questions. Let's talk about, I know that you talked about like your streams, right? And you were saying that a lot of the work, a lot of the fabrication is domestic, which I love, let's reduce the amount of international shipping. My question is kind of following up on that ethos. Is your product, I know that this is only version 1. Are you looking like what is your end of life idea for these? I assume although I wish they don't last forever. So what does that end of life look like for this product?
Sure. Yeah. Right now it has a phenomenal lifetime in practice. It's about 18 years per unit. So as we put these in, it has a really good run rate. And then of course, I mean the turnover, renewing that equipment is fairly straightforward in this case, compared to pulling out massive turbines or refurbs on larger hydro sites, which is also a major focus point of this category, right? Bringing them up to speed, the larger sites. In this case, though, we can really just replace the modules and replace the turbines after that life cycle, and then put it back into practice, hopefully. Typically, in this country, you want something that's gonna live in the field for about the amount of time as a power purchase agreement term, and so we're pretty close to that, which is super.
Yeah,
Super is a version 1. Yeah.
that is very exciting, and obviously a lot of room to grow into the future as you
Yeah.
continue to put this into play. Any other questions?
Presentation might have been a little short. I could have I could
No,
have
I
squeezed
think that you
more
did a
out there.
fantastic job. I think it was very comprehensible, which is why there's only a limited amount of questions. You did a very great job. I am excited to see this. Now, you said that this is already something that has been kind of imposed in Atlantic Canada. Is there a site that if we wanted to go take a field trip and see where we could see this happening? Is there somewhere around here locally that we could view your product?
You will be able to very soon. So we have 4 of them that are being installed currently. We have another 30 that are going out throughout New Brunswick and PEI over the next 6 months. So maybe something that we could do, Ashley, is we can send out kind of an announcement as these hit the water. It's something that we would love to announce in partnership with the ACC, and obviously it would be a phenomenal kind of opportunity to get together. And yeah, come out, and we're planning on hosting a couple town halls around these as well to get it again, like accessibility in the hydro space is a major milestone here. It's something that I think Aslan is in a great position to push forward. And so we want as much public engagement at this stage of the game as possible. We want people to understand what this looks like, what it feels like, and the difference it makes on the graph as it ramps up. We want the public to understand the impact on those communities from a really rainy season, or from the differences in the fluctuations in climate that you're talking about. So yeah, we've got several locations that are sort of rolling out at the moment. I'd love to announce them alongside you guys, and also, if questions do come up from anyone, of course, you can get in touch with me. I'm sure my coordinates are around here somewhere. I can share them.
Well, wonderful, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. We have nothing but the utmost gratitude for you sharing this incredible innovation with us today. And of course, everybody who's tuning in today and on YouTube when this is up, feel free to sign up to our newsletter. And we would love to invite you to some of Aslan's community engagement and hopefully maybe a groundbreaking in the future. So with that, thank you so much, Andrew, and to everybody else. This has been another wonderful edition of the Innovation Speaker Series. We'll see you next month as we talk a little more about city planning. We're going to have the Black Arcs in here talking about wonderful community-based feedback circles. So you're not going to want to miss that. Make sure you're tuning in next month as well. To everybody, I hope that you have a wonderful day. And if you're in New Brunswick, make sure you get out and vote.